At number 6, we have The Exorcist. I remember going to see a re-release of this film at Halloween when I was about 17 in the cinema, and it really disturbed me. Actually, I may have been about 15 or 16 because I remember sneaking into the bar at the cinema with my friends and having a few drinks. Now that was disturbing. The Exorcist follows the story of a young girl seemingly possessed by a demon, or maybe the devil himself. At the same time, a priest who has lost his faith and is considering leaving the Catholic Church is asked to investigate the case. A series of deaths and disturbing acts surround the young girl as the priest fights for both the girl's soul and his belief in God. So much has been said about this film already that there is very little to add. The question I always find interesting is whether The Exorcist is actually scary or whether it is disturbing. For me, although it is frightening, it's more disturbing than scary, although a suffocating tension permeates the entire film. The film has gained a lot of press over the years for supposed supernatural events and untimely deaths being connected to the making of the film, much like when they opened the tomb of Tutankhamun. But I don't know much about that, but certainly this film is a one-off. I don't think I've ever seen a film with this type of ominous atmosphere before, and its legacy speaks for itself when it's often voted the scariest film ever made by the public. Although I disagree with that, it is certainly up there. One of the things that probably makes this film as special as it is the way that it was made. William Friedkin, the director, did everything he could, from slapping people to firing shotguns off camera, to create as uncomfortable an atmosphere as possible, and it certainly shows. I think sometimes that's why people watch this film and they get a really uncomfortable feeling from watching it, because the performances are, for want of a better word, real. The actors genuinely were scared because of what the director was doing. I'd also like to say at this point that the sequels are pretty terrible, with the exception of The Exorcist 3. That film is very underrated, and the first hour is equal to most films in the horror genre. So just as a little tangent, check The Exorcist 3 out. The Exorcist is a film that has had a huge effect on the film industry. Unfortunately, few films made after its release contain the same sense of dread and apprehension. If you haven't seen it, check it out, but be warned, in the right atmosphere, it can be a very disturbing experience, so I'd watch it with a friend. But then again, that's just me, I'm a wimp. At number 5, we have A Nightmare on Elm Street. For those not familiar with the Nightmare on Elm Street films, the movies typically follow a group of teenagers being killed in their dreams while they sleep by a sadistic, twisted creature called Freddy Krueger. As revealed in the first movie, Freddy Krueger was in fact a real person. He was a janitor at a local school and had been a serial child murderer. To protect their children, a group of local parents conspired to kill Krueger and burned him alive by trapping him in his own boiler room. Krueger then returns as a hideously burned demon that kills children by attacking them in their dreams. The act of killing children in their dreams, the place where they're supposed to be safest, the place where they can think about and aspire to all the things that they ever want out of life, that's a frightening thing in itself, especially if you're a kid watching it. The idea that in your sleep, while you're dreaming in your dreams, something terrible can come for you. That's why the series works. Freddy Krueger became a comedic figure as the series progressed. By the time the third film had been made, it was well established that the public in fact found the character entertaining, even more so than the heroes of the films. And the series became purely about how Freddy could dispose of annoying teenagers in the most comical fashion, rather than about horror. What's often forgotten is how frightening the first Nightmare on Elm Street film actually was. There were few laughs, and while Freddy still possessed an element of sarcasm, there was no doubt that he was an evil, twisted character to be feared. Freddy Krueger became an absolute phenomenon throughout the 80s and 90s and is forever ingrained on popular culture. There was a music video, a TV series, and all types of memorabilia. The most prominent of which was probably Freddy's weapon that he had, which was basically a glove with knives on the end of his fingers. So far, Freddy has had 6 films which are directly related to one another. The original and then 5 direct sequels. There was also a film made in the 1990s set outside of the canon depicting Freddy as a fictional character who begins killing those involved in making the Nightmare films due to them ending the series. It's no surprise that this film was actually made by Wes Craven, who used the same concept of making fun of the horror movies, but in a slightly more light-hearted way in the Scream films. Freddy also co-starred alongside Jason Voorhees in the film Freddy vs. Jason. Interestingly, this took many years to come about, as in Jason Goes to Hell, years earlier, Freddy's hand appeared at the end of the film, pulling Jason's mask down to hell. I always remember watching that scene, or waiting for it because I'd heard about it. And everybody wondered, is there going to be a Freddy and Jason film? Well, 10, 15 years later, there finally was. I like the subsequent Freddy films, and it makes me think of Halloween because, like many, I both watched Nightmare on Elm Street films at that time of year and dressed up as Freddy on Halloween. But really, the first film is a great horror movie. The rest are just fun flicks to pass the time. And New Nightmare is quite interesting as a sort of concept piece. And I will say, Freddy vs. Jason I thought was a lot better than I believed it would be. As long as you don't take it serious, it's a good bit of fun. Despite this, Freddy Krueger is easily one of the greatest villains in cinema history. And there's talk of a reboot, involving Michael Bay, but we'll see what happens.